Jacques Attali war ein Berater von François Mitterrand, also dem ehemaligen Präsidenten von Frankreich, und schrieb im Jahr 1981, in der Zukunft wird es darum gehen, einen Weg zu finden, die Bevölkerung zu reduzieren. Wir werden mit den Alten beginnen, denn sobald der Mensch über 60, 65 Jahre alt ist, lebt er länger, als er produziert, und das kommt die Gesellschaft teuer zu stehen. Dann die Schwachen und dann die Nutzlosen, die nichts zur Gesellschaft beitragen, weil es immer mehr werden, und vor allem schließlich die Dummen. Euthanasie richtet sich an diese Gruppen. Euthanasie muss ein wesentliches Instrument unserer zukünftigen Gesellschaften sein, in allen Fällen. Natürlich werden wir nicht in der Lage sein, Menschen hinzurichten oder Lager zu organisieren. Wir werden sie loswerden, indem wir sie in dem Glauben lassen, dass es zu ihrem eigenen Besten ist. Eine zu große und größtenteils unnötige Bevölkerung ist etwas, das wirtschaftlich zu teuer ist. Auch gesellschaftlich ist es für die menschliche Maschine viel besser, wenn sie abrupt aufhört, als wenn sie allmählich verkommt. Wir werden nicht in der Lage sein, Intelligenztests an Millionen und Abermillionen von Menschen zu bestehen. Das können Sie sich vorstellen. Wir werden etwas finden oder verursachen. Eine Pandemie, die auf bestimmte Menschen abzielt, eine echte Wirtschaftskrise oder nicht, ein Virus, das die Alten oder die Älteren befallen wird. Es spielt keine Rolle. Die Schwachen und die Ängstlichen werden erliegen. Die Dummen werden es glauben und darum bitten, behandelt zu werden. Wir werden dafür gesorgt haben, die Behandlung geplant zu haben, eine Behandlung, die die Lösung sein wird. Die Selektion der Idioten wird sich also von selbst erledigen. Sie werden allein zur Schlachtbank gehen.
Deutlicher kann man es nicht sagen. Und da sind ja schon die Leute, die man loswerden will, die Alten. Im Grunde deckt sich das mit den Leuten, die sich jetzt, also die Impfpriorisierung. Erst die Alten, dann genau. Jetzt kommen auch Behinderte, die kriegen jetzt Johnson & Johnson und sowas sagt man, all solche Dinge. Obdachlosen soll man das anbieten und so weiter. Also quasi.
Und ich will das auch noch mal festigen. Dieses Fragment ist in dem Buch Eine kurze Geschichte der Zukunft gesammelt, das 2006 in Frankreich erschienen ist. Und Jacques Attali ist ein französischer Wirtschaftswissenschaftler und Gründungspräsident der Europäischen Bank für
Jacques Attali, PhD Economics, Université Paris Dauphine, 1972. Chief of Staff to François Mitterrand, 1974. Special Advisor to President François Mitterrand, 1981 to 1991. Organized the Versailles G7 Summit, 1982. Founding President of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, 1991 to 1993. Head of International Consulting Firm, Attali & Associates, 1994. Author of A Brief History of the Future, 2006. Recognized as one of the top 100 global thinkers. Foreign Policy Magazine 2009. Bilderberg Group meeting attendee. Received the Woodrow Wilson Award for Public Service, 2011. World Economic Forum Davos attendee. Mentor to current French President, Emmanuel Macron.
Secondly, return to normal, reorganization. No, there won't be a return to normal like I said. We are going to radically move towards the level of new technology, new power, the top power in the world that knows even more. It will be necessary, to be accepted, a general disorder on setting up a planetary order with a world government, with some sort of world currency as we did for Europe.
Advance out of fear. History teaches us that humanity evolves significantly only when it is really afraid. Then, once the crisis is over, it transforms these mechanisms to make them compatible with individual freedom and to include them in a democratic health policy. The beginning of the pandemic could trigger one of these structuring fears. The World Health Organization has set up alert procedures on a planetary scale. We will have to put in place a global police force, global storage, and therefore global taxation. We will then come, much faster than the sole economic reason would have allowed, to set up the basis of a real world government.
Jacques Attali. Writing for L'Express magazine Paris. 6th of June, 2009.
It is one of the greatest medical scandals of the century, according to a leading health expert in Brussels. The Council of Europe health chief has accused major pharmaceutical firms of organizing a campaign of panic and unduly influencing World Health Organization decisions. And with European countries now burdened with bills for millions of unwanted doses of the swine flu vaccine, he wants an investigation. Our science correspondent Tom Clark has this report.
Flu viruses can spread.
64,000 people dead, tens of thousands hospitalized, a country crippled by a virus. The predictions for the impact of swine flu on Britain were grim. The government's response, spending hundreds of millions of pounds on antiviral drugs and vaccines, adverts and leaflets. But 10 months into the pandemic, only 355 Britons have died, and globally, the virus hasn't lived up to our fears. Were governments misled into preparing for the worst? Politicians in Brussels are now asking for an investigation into the role pharmaceutical companies played in influencing political decisions that led to a swine flu spending spree.
There must be a process to get more transparency, how the decisions in the WHO, how they function, and who is influencing the decisions of the WHO, and what is the role of the pharmaceutical industry there. I'm very suspicious about the processes which are behind this pandemic.
The Council of Europe Committee want the investigation to focus on the World Health Organization's decision to lower the threshold required for a pandemic to be formally declared.
The world is now at the start of the 2009 influenza pandemic.
When this happened in June last year, governments had to activate huge pre-prepared contracts for drugs and vaccines with manufacturers. They also want to probe ties between key WHO advisors and drug companies.
Who is deciding what the risk is? Is it the pharmaceutical companies who want to sell drugs, or is it someone making a decision based on the perceived danger? In this case, it appears that the danger was vastly exaggerated. And was it exaggerated by the pharmaceutical companies in order to make money?
The media will enjoy a greater hold over democracy and over citizen choices. The great corporations, with a base of thousands of specialist companies, will bring influence to bear on the media, using advertising to blackmail them, in order to orient citizens' choices. By around 2030, the United States could then become a Scandinavian-style social democracy, or a dictatorship. For the active population, the burden of financing retirement will be increasingly onerous. After a very long struggle and in the midst of a serious ecological crisis, the still dominant empire, the United States, will finally be defeated, around 2035. Hyper-democracy, it will culminate in the creation of a democratic world government. The UN Security Council will serve as the executive body of a planetary government. Before 2030, everyone but the poorest will everywhere be connected, to every high-capacity information grid. Commercial, digital, and financial exchanges will increasingly take place beyond the reach of states. Before 2030, products, machines, and people will also be equipped with an identity tag. Microprocessors will use DNA and peptide biomolecules, which will serve in the construction of nanocomputers. A kind of hyper-surveillance will see the light of day. Private security, police, and information will compete with national police forces in surveillance of movement and data. Biometric techniques will allow for surveillance of travelers, workers, and consumers. Nothing will be hidden anymore.
Jaques Attali. A Brief History of the Future. A Brave and Controversial Look at the 21st Century. 2006.
So what becomes of freedom in an overwhelming healthcare system? The very concept of freedom will become more and more perverted. And this is what is fascinating, in this evolution, and it is perhaps why it is the most terrible, is that it will recover all the concepts, including that of freedom. I would even say the ideas of the South we always talked about, because what is it? This society of devices, that teaches us to monitor ourselves, this society which says be free, get rid of the medicine, you even get out of the hospital. In other words, society will, under the pretext of freedom, under the pretext of autonomy, create the conditions for the most formidable alienation, which is in a way, voluntary isolation by oneself, to a standard imposed externally. We will be told we must not smoke, drive, not drink, but also, not having any hereditary genetics outside of the norm. If you have it, you do whatever you can to get rid of it. And in other words, we will only make what is the absolute form of dictatorship. That each of us freely, in quotation marks, wants to be in conformity with each other. Freely want to behave like a slave, and what is the absolute form of dictatorship? That each of us freely, in quotation marks, want to conform to the norm, an external standard ideal copy. And that is what is fascinating, is that it is through medicine, through good and evil, through the relationship with death, that this new form of totalitarian society is taking hold. In studying the general economic problems of Western society, I have noticed that health costs are one of the essential factors in the economic crisis. The production of consumers, and their maintenance, is expensive, even more expensive than the production of goods. As soon as you go beyond 60 to 65, people live longer than they produce, and they cost society dearly. From the point of view of society, it is much better for the human machine to come to an abrupt halt, than for it to deteriorate gradually. This is perfectly clear. If we remember that 2/3 of health expenditure is concentrated on the last years of life. As a socialist, I am objectively opposed to extending life because it is an illusion. Euthanasia will be one of the essential instruments of our future societies, in all cases. I believe that in the next 20 years, genetic engineering will be as commonplace, as well known, and as present in everyday life as the internal combustion engine is today. With genetic engineering, we could gradually create the conditions which would be made up of copies of humans sold to humans, chimeras or hybrids, used as slaves. It is clear that the discourse on prevention, health economics, and good medical practice will lead to the need for each individual to have a medical file, which will be put on a magnetic tape. All these files will be centralized in a computer, to which doctors will have access. The question arises: will the police be able to access these files? I don't believe in Orwellianism, because it's a form of technical totalitarianism, with a visible and centralized Big Brother. I believe rather in implicit totalitarianism, with an invisible and decentralized Big Brother. These machines for monitoring our health, which we could have for our own good, will enslave us, for our own good. In a way, we will be subjected to gentle, and permanent conditioning.
Jaques Attali. The Future of Life. Interviews with Michel Salomon. Pages 265 to 279. Le Visage de l'Avenir Collection. Edition Seguers. 1981.